Today we're going to talk about Langerek and Hirsthouse's views on abortion. Langerek talks about the potentiality principle. He states that the UDH will eventually be a human and have all the rights associated with that. So since they eventually will be a human and have those rights, that they should be afforded by virtue of those rights now as while they're a UDH and still developing. He points out that unless something goes extremely wrong, the UDH will become a person, and this is stronger than the possibility that lies when the sperm and eggs are separate before conception. He uses the analogy of a president-elect and states that when after a president is elected, before they actually go into office, there's a couple months where they're a president-elect, and they are afforded the same respect and honor as a president, even though they are not president yet, because they are going to be a president, unless something, barring a tragedy or unforeseen circumstances. He talks about the different stages of UDH development. He breaks it up into 4 stages, the first being implantation. The second stage is quickening, he calls quickening, which is in the second trimester. And this is when people outside of the mother can start feeling the movements in the stomach. The third stage is at the end of the second trimester, beginning of the third, and it's called viability. And this is when a UDH is capable of living with medical care outside of the mother's womb. And the 4th stage is birth. Langerek argues that in each of these stages, it becomes increasingly harder to justify an abortion. Because of this, there's a progressive increase in moral status for the UDH while it passes through these different stages. Hirsthouse goes on to defend the virtue theory of abortion. She starts off by defending virtue theory in general, stating that virtue isn't any more obscure of a concept than other concepts such as rationality and happiness. She states that virtue is not just concerned with being, but also concerned with doing. And that, yes, sometimes it can't provide a clear answer, but this is no different than any other moral argument or moral philosophy, in that if there was a right answer, if one moral philosophy had all the right answers, then we would just adopt that and be done with the discussion. One point I really like that she makes is about moral knowledge. And she talks about how unlike mathematics, moral knowledge requires experiences. And she points out that there are very young, mathematically gifted geniuses. However, there's not the same thing, or the same thing doesn't occur in the field of ethics or morals. And that's because these require life experiences to have wisdom and knowledge, unlike mathematics, where you can kind of be born with the ability. Her argument on abortion is that we shouldn't argue about the legality of abortion, and we also should not take into account the science of developing UDHs, or we shouldn't get into any sophisticated philosophy discussions. She breaks it down to basically the simple question is not can you, but should you. She argues that this is never a trivial matter, that to have abortions for trivial matters, it would be callous and light-minded, and not the sort of thing that a virtuous person would do. She goes on to state that she believes that in some cases abortion can be the all things considered answer to the question. And she points out in scenarios where, for instance, a woman's a coal miner, and she's not going to be able to perform her job adequately, and maybe the baby will suffer because she's on her hands and knees crawling in coal mines all day, that this might be a scenario where it would be okay. Another point that I really like that she points out is the importance of parenthood. She says it's very important for women to become mothers intrinsically. That if a woman does not want to become a mother, it might be because she's avoiding it, trying to wait for the perfect time to have a child. But she says oftentimes this is not the case. There is no necessarily perfect time to have a child. She says that it's being a mother or a parent is essential to flourishing human life, and argues that avoiding it can signify that someone is childish, materialistic, short-sighted, or shallow. And my favorite part is that she includes men in this. She says it's very important for a man to become a father. And I agree with these completely. I think it's fatherhood and parenthood, motherhood are very important parts of our social fabric and what makes us to be humans.